What's up, baseball fanatics? Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, buckle up because we've got some absolutely explosive Blue Jays news that's going to blow your mind. We're talking trade rumors that have the entire fan base split right down the middle, bombshell revelations about Kyle Tucker that'll make your jaw drop, and some serious insider information about what Ross Atkins is cooking up behind the scenes. And trust me, folks, you're going to want to hear every single word of this because the Blue Jays offseason is about to get absolutely insane. Now, before we dive into this absolute mayhem, I need you to do me a huge favor. If you love Blue Jays content, if you live and breathe Toronto baseball, smash that subscribe button right now. Seriously, you guys have been absolutely incredible with your support, and it genuinely means the world to me. Your comments, your likes, your engagement, it's what keeps this channel going strong, and I cannot thank you enough. Alright, let's get into the madness. So, here's the situation. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say this might be one of the most controversial trade proposals we've seen all offseason. The Toronto Blue Jays, fresh off what's actually been a pretty solid winter despite missing out on Kyle Tucker and not landing some other big names, are now being linked to a trade that has literally split the fan base into two camps. And when I tell you about this trade, you're either going to love it or absolutely hate it. There's no in-between here, folks. But first, let's set the stage. We're literally just weeks away from spring training. Can you believe it? The Blue Jays have already started selling tickets for opening day. Baseball is right around the corner, and there's this electric feeling in the air that Ross Atkins isn't done making moves. And if you know anything about Ross Atkins, you know the man loves to make trades during the offseason. It's practically his calling card at this point. Recent reports from Keegan Matheson have been suggesting that a trade seems like a legitimate path forward for the Blue Jays. They're looking to upgrade the team, particularly when it comes to adding another bat to the lineup and bolstering that bullpen, which quite frankly has been a concern for anyone who's been paying attention. And that's where things get absolutely wild. A new article just dropped, and the headline alone is enough to make you do a double take. We're talking about a trade pitch that would deal away a 44 home run slugger and bring in what they're calling a new Jeff Hoffman upgrade. Now, when I first saw this, I had to read it 3 times because the package being proposed is absolutely bonkers. We're talking about sending out multiple everyday players, including some fan favorites, in exchange for relief pitcher Jojo Romero and outfielder Nootbaar from the St. Louis Cardinals. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Cardinals are clearly in sell mode. Anyone who's been following baseball this offseason knows that St. Louis is tearing it down and rebuilding. They're listening to offers on virtually everyone, and that makes them the perfect trade partner for a team like Toronto that's trying to win right now. The Blue Jays are in that competitive window. They've got Vladimir Guerrero Jr. entering what could be his final year in Toronto, and they need to maximize this opportunity. So let's break down this proposed trade because it's an absolute doozy. The Blue Jays would be sending out Anthony Santander, Nathan Lukes, Bowden Francis, and prospect Johnny King to the Cardinals in exchange for Jojo Romero and Nootbaar. Now, I know what you're thinking already. You're probably screaming at your screen right now, and I completely understand why. This trade has so many layers to it that we need to unpack each piece individually. Let's start with Anthony Santander, because he's the headliner here. This is a guy who smashed 44 home runs just last season. 44. That's not just good, that's elite power production. But here's the thing, and this is crucial to understanding why this trade is even being discussed. Santander is coming off what was arguably the worst year of his career when you look beyond just the home run totals. He dealt with injuries, his overall performance was inconsistent, and his trade value is probably at its lowest point right now. Now, from a business perspective, trading a player when their value is at its lowest makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It's like selling your house during a recession when prices are in the toilet. You're not maximizing your return, and you're potentially giving up on a player who could bounce back in a major way. Santander has shown in the past that he's capable of being a legitimate middle-of-the-order threat. The power is undeniable. The potential for a 30-plus home run season is absolutely there. So why would you trade him right now when his stock is down? That's the first major issue with this proposed trade. You'd be selling low on Santander, which goes against every smart baseball operations principle. But wait, it gets even more complicated because you're also giving up Nathan Lukes in this deal. Now, Lukes isn't the household name that Santander is, but he's a solid player who provides depth and flexibility. According to projections, he's expected to start about 29 games in left field next season, with additional time split across other outfield positions. Giving up both Santander and Lukes creates a massive hole in your outfield depth chart. You're talking about removing two everyday players from your roster in one fell swoop. That's a significant risk, especially when you consider that baseball is a long season and injuries happen. You need depth, you need flexibility, and you need guys who can step in and produce when called upon. Losing both of these players simultaneously would leave the Blue Jays extremely thin in the outfield. Unless they have another move lined up that we don't know about yet, then there's Bowden Francis, who admittedly doesn't have much trade value at this point in his career. He's been up and down, literally and figuratively, bouncing between the majors and minors without really establishing himself as a reliable big league pitcher. Including him in this trade makes sense from a roster construction standpoint. He's a throw-in piece, a guy who might have some upside that the Cardinals could develop, but he's not moving the needle in terms of trade value. And finally, there's Johnny King, one of the Blue Jays' top pitching prospects. Now, we're talking about real value here. Prospects are the currency of baseball trades, and giving up a highly regarded pitching prospect is never a decision you make lightly. The Blue Jays farm system has been depleted over recent years as they've traded away prospects to acquire major league talent. Every time you trade a top prospect, you're gambling that the return will be worth more than what that prospect could become. Sometimes it works out brilliantly, sometimes it blows up in your face. That's the risk you take. So, what would the Blue Jays be getting back in this proposed deal? Let's talk about Jojo Romero first, because he's absolutely fascinating and honestly, he might be the real prize in this entire package. Jojo Romero is a left-handed relief pitcher who put up absolutely filthy numbers last season. We're talking about a 2.07 ERA. That's not just good, that's elite shutdown stuff. When you look at the advanced metrics, the underlying numbers, everything points to Romero being a legitimate high-leverage reliever. And here's what makes Romero so valuable for the Blue Jays specifically. They desperately need bullpen help, particularly from the left side. If you look at their current bullpen construction, they've got Jeff Hoffman, who's solid but inconsistent. They've got Chad Green, Tyler Rogers, Luis Frias, and some other pieces. But they're missing that shutdown lefty who can come in during high-leverage situations and get the job done. Romero would fill that role perfectly. Over the past 2 years, Romero has recorded 54 holds and 9 saves. In the most recent season alone, he converted 8 of 9 save opportunities. Those numbers tell you everything you need to know about how his team uses him. He's deployed in the most critical moments of games, to situations where one mistake can cost you the entire ballgame, and he consistently delivers. That's exactly the type of pitcher the Blue Jays need if they're going to compete in the absolutely brutal American League East. The Blue Jays' bullpen has been a question mark for years now. How many times have we seen them blow leads in the 7th, 8th, or 9th innings? How many games have slipped away because they didn't have that lockdown reliever they could trust in crucial moments? Adding Jojo Romero would be a massive upgrade to their relief corps, giving them another weapon they can deploy with confidence late in games. But Romero isn't the only piece coming back in this deal. There's also Lars Nootbaar, the Cardinals outfielder who would presumably step into an everyday role in Toronto's lineup. Now, Nootbaar had a rough year last season. There's no sugarcoating that. His numbers were down across the board, and there are legitimate questions about whether he can be a productive everyday player at the major league level. However, there's also reason for optimism. Nootbaar is still relatively young in baseball terms. He's shown flashes of solid offensive production in the past, and there's a school of thought that suggests he could bounce back with a change of scenery. Sometimes players just need a fresh start, a new organization, a different coaching staff, and suddenly they rediscover the form that made them prospects in the first place. The idea behind including Nootbaar in this trade would be to fill the void created by trading away Santander and Lukes. You'd be replacing 2 outfielders with 1, banking on Nootbaar to provide enough offensive production to justify the swap. And here's where the debate really heats up among Blue Jays fans. Is Lars Nootbaar coming off a down year really an adequate replacement for Anthony Santander, a proven 44 home run hitter? On paper, the answer seems obvious. Santander hit 44 home runs. That's elite power production that you simply cannot replace easily. Even if Nootbaar has a career year, there's virtually no scenario where he matches that kind of power output. So you'd be downgrading offensively while upgrading your bullpen. The question becomes, is that trade-off worth it? This is where roster construction gets really interesting and where different philosophies clash. Some people believe that bullpen arms are overvalued, that you can find effective relievers on the cheap, and that trading away offensive production for pitching help is a mistake. They'd argue that the Blue Jays should keep their power hitters and find bullpen help through other avenues, whether that's free agency, waiver claims, or developing internal options. Other people believe that in today's game, particularly in the playoffs, having a dominant bullpen is absolutely essential. They'd point to recent World Series champions and show you how teams with elite bullpens tend to go deeper in October. From this perspective, trading offensive production for bullpen upgrades makes perfect sense, especially if you believe your lineup is deep enough to absorb the loss. So where do I stand on this proposed trade? Well, here's my honest take. I don't think this exact trade gets done as currently constructed. There are too many moving parts, too many risks, and the Blue Jays would be giving up too much offensive production without adequate replacement. Trading both Santander and Lukes simultaneously creates too big a hole in the outfield, and I'm not convinced that Lars Nootbaar is the answer to fill that void. However, and this is important, I absolutely love the idea of targeting Jojo Romero. If the Blue Jays can find a way to acquire him without gutting their outfield depth, that's a move they should absolutely make. Romero represents exactly the type of reliever they need, and adding him would instantly make their bullpen significantly better. The question is whether they can structure a deal that doesn't involve giving up both Santander and Lukes. What if, instead of this proposed package, the Blue Jays offered Nathan Lukes, Johnny King, and maybe another mid-level prospect or two? You'd still be giving up value, you'd still be partying with a top pitching prospect in King, but you'd be keeping Santander and his 44 home run potential. That feels like a more balanced trade to me, one that upgrades the bullpen without completely decimating the offense. There's also the possibility of expanding the trade too. Include other Cardinals players. St. Louis has several interesting pieces that could help the Blue Jays. Brendan Donovan is a versatile infielder who can play multiple positions. Alec Burleson is another bat that could provide depth. If the Blue Jays are going to do a significant deal with the Cardinals, maybe they should think bigger and try to acquire multiple pieces that address different roster needs. The beauty of trading with a team that's clearly selling is that you have options. The Cardinals aren't in a position to be picky. They're tearing it down. They want prospects and young talent, and they're willing to move virtually anyone. That gives the Blue Jays leverage in negotiations, assuming they're willing to part with the prospect capital necessary to get a deal done. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture here, because this potential trade doesn't exist in a vacuum. The Blue Jays have had what most people would consider a pretty successful offseason so far. They've added pieces, they've improved the roster, and they've shown that they're serious about competing in what is arguably the toughest division in baseball. The American League East is an absolute gauntlet, and every team, except maybe the Rays, is loading up for a potential playoff run. When you look at the projected wins above replacement by team across Major League Baseball, it's absolutely wild to see how stacked the AL East is. The Yankees, Red Sox, Orioles, and Blue Jays all rank in the top 10. That's 4 teams from one division, all projected to be among the best in baseball. The competition is fierce, and there's no room for error. Every win matters, every roster decision has significant implications, and the margin between making the playoffs and staying home in October is razor thin. The Blue Jays currently have a projected WAR of 46.5, which puts them 4th in the division. The Yankees recently passed them after their offseason moves. That should tell you everything you need to know about the arms race happening in the AL East. You can't stand still. You can't be satisfied with what you have. You need to keep pushing, keep adding, keep improving, because your division rivals certainly aren't slowing down. This is why the conversation about whether the Blue Jays need to make another move is so important. They've done good work this offseason, absolutely. But is it enough? When you're competing against the Yankees' payroll, the Orioles' young talent, and the Red Sox's recent additions, can you really afford to enter the season thinking your roster is complete? Most objective observers would say no. The Blue Jays still have holes that need addressing. The bullpen remains a concern. The outfield depth could use reinforcement. And with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. potentially entering his final year in Toronto, the pressure to win right now is immense. You cannot waste a year of prime Vlad. You cannot squander this competitive window. Every decision needs to be made with urgency and purpose. That brings us to one of the most interesting pieces of information to come out recently. And this one is going to sting for Blue Jays fans. Whit Merrifield recently appeared on his podcast and dropped an absolute bombshell about Kyle Tucker. According to Merrifield, Kyle Tucker really wanted to play for the Toronto Blue Jays. He wanted to come to Toronto. The Blue Jays were his preferred destination, but the money from the Dodgers was simply too much to pass up. Let that sink in for a moment. Kyle Tucker, one of the best players in baseball, wanted to be a Blue Jay. Toronto was his choice. And they lost him anyway because they couldn't match the financial offer from Los Angeles. The Dodgers ended up giving Tucker a deal that was reportedly in the range of 10 years and $350 million after the Mets initially offered him something around $40 to $50 million per year. Those are astronomical numbers, eh? The kind of money that only a handful of organizations can realistically offer now. Before Blue Jays fans start spiraling into despair, let's add some context here. The offer Toronto put on the table was substantial. We're talking about a massive financial commitment that would have made Tucker one of the highest paid players in franchise history. In most circumstances, in most years, that offer would have been enough. But we're living in an absolutely insane salary environment right now, where the mega market teams are throwing around money like it's monopoly currency. The reality is that the Blue Jays, for all their resources and revenue, simply cannot compete dollar for dollar with teams like the Dodgers, Yankees, and Mets. Those organizations operate on a different financial plane, where luxury tax penalties are just the cost of doing business and where half-billion-dollar contracts are becoming normalized. It's frustrating for fans of every other team, but it's the reality of modern baseball. So while it stings to hear that Tucker wanted to come to Toronto, there's also a silver lining here. The Blue Jays are clearly doing something right. Players want to play for this organization. Toronto is seen as a desirable destination. The problem isn't that players don't want to be Blue Jays. The problem is that other teams can simply outbid Toronto when it comes to the absolute elite talents commanding record-breaking contracts. What does this mean going forward? It means the Blue Jays need to be smart, creative, and strategic in how they build their roster. They're probably not going to win many bidding wars for the Juan Sotos and Kyle Tuckers of the world. But they can absolutely compete for the next tier of players. They can make savvy trades like potentially acquiring Jojo Romero, and they can develop their own talent to supplement the roster. Speaking of additions, there's another interesting development worth mentioning. Former Blue Jay Seranthony Dominguez just signed a 2-year, $20 million deal with the Chicago White Sox. Now, Dominguez is a reliever who had some success during his time in Toronto before moving on. At 2 years and $20 million, that's actually a pretty reasonable contract for a pitcher of his caliber. The question is whether the Blue Jays should have brought him back at that price. $20 million over 2 years isn't exactly breaking the bank, and adding another bullpen arm is never a bad idea when you're trying to compete in the AL East. Some reports suggested that Dominguez was actually looking for a 1-year deal, which would have made him even more attractive from a financial flexibility standpoint. This is one of those moves that probably won't make or break the Blue Jays season, but it's worth noting as another piece of the puzzle. The White Sox got a decent reliever at a reasonable price, and the Blue Jays passed on the opportunity to bring back a familiar face. Whether that decision looks smart or foolish will depend on how both Dominguez performs in Chicago and what the Blue Jays bullpen looks like come October. Now, let's zoom out and think about the bigger picture of where the Blue Jays stand right now. Spring training is literally weeks away. Pitchers and catchers will be reporting before we know it, and pretty soon we'll be watching actual baseball games again. The offseason is winding down, and while there's still time for Ross Atkins to make another move, the window is closing rapidly. The Blue Jays have improved their roster, but the question remains whether they've improved enough. They're facing an uphill battle in the AL East where 4 teams all have legitimate playoff aspirations. The margin for error is virtually non-existent. One bad week, one extended slump, one key injury, and suddenly you're fighting an uphill battle just to stay relevant in the wildcard race. This is why the debate about potential trades like the Jojo Romero deal is so important. Every move matters. Every decision has ripple effects throughout the roster. If the Blue Jays trade for Romero and give up too much offensive production, they might improve their bullpen while simultaneously making their lineup weaker. But if they stand pat and don't add bullpen help, they might enter the season with a glaring weakness that costs them games in September. It's a delicate balancing act, and it's why general managers make the big bucks. Ross Atkins and the Blue Jays front office have to weigh all these factors, consider all the possibilities, and make decisions that give the team the best chance to win. It's not an easy job, and fans will inevitably criticize whatever choice they make, but that's the nature of running a baseball team. What would I do if I were in charge? Here's my thought process. I'd absolutely be pursuing Jojo Romero aggressively. He's exactly the type of reliever the Blue Jays need, and acquiring him should be a priority. However, I'd be very hesitant to give up Anthony Santander in any deal, especially when his value is at a low point. I'd much rather build a package around Nathan Lukes, Johnny King, and potentially another prospect or two. If the Cardinals insist on getting Santander, I'd probably walk away from the negotiation table. The risk of trading him now and watching him bounce back with 30-plus home runs somewhere else is too high. Instead, I'd explore other bullpen options. Whether that's through trades with different teams or looking at the remaining free agent market, I'd also be thinking creatively about roster construction. Are there other positions where the Blue Jays could upgrade? Can they add depth pieces that provide insurance against injury? Are there buy low candidates on other teams who might bounce back with a change of scenery? These are the questions that smart front offices ask themselves constantly. The bottom line is that the Blue Jays are in a fascinating position right now. They've had a solid offseason, they've added some pieces, and they're clearly trying to compete. But there are still questions about whether they've done enough to legitimately challenge for a division title and a deep playoff run. The AL East is loaded, the competition is fierce, and there's no margin for error. One thing that gives me hope is that Ross Atkins has shown a willingness to be aggressive. He's not afraid to make trades, he's not afraid to take calculated risks, and he's not content to simply tread water. That's exactly the mindset you want from your general manager when you're in a competitive window. You can't be timid, you can't be conservative. You need to go for it. As we head toward spring training and the start of the season, Blue Jays fans should be excited about what's ahead. Yes, there are questions. Yes, there are concerns. But there's also a lot of talent on this roster, a lot of potential, and a lot of reasons to believe this team can compete with anyone. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is still one of the best hitters in baseball. Bo Bichette, when healthy, is an all-star caliber shortstop. The starting rotation has some quality arms, and if they can shore up the bullpen and maintain their offensive depth, this team has a legitimate shot at making noise in October. The proposed Jojo Romero trade is just one of many possibilities that could unfold over the next few weeks. Maybe it happens in some modified form. Maybe the Blue Jays find a completely different trade partner. Maybe they surprise everyone and make a splash in free agency. Or maybe they enter the season with the roster largely as currently constructed, and let the chips fall where they may. Whatever happens, it's going to be fascinating to watch. The Blue Jays are in the spotlight, the pressure is on, and the expectations are high. That's exactly where you want to be as a baseball fan. You want your team competing, you want meaningful games in September, and you want that chance to see your guys in October. So where do you stand on all this, folks? Do you think the Blue Jays should pull the trigger on a trade for Jojo Romero? Would you be willing to give up Anthony Santander to make it happen, or do you think that's too steep a price? What about Nathan Lukes and Johnny King? Are you comfortable partying with a top pitching prospect for bullpen help? And what about the Kyle Tucker revelation? Does it frustrate you knowing he wanted to come to Toronto but the money was just too much? I want to hear from all of you in the comments below. This is what makes the offseason so much fun. The debates, the discussions, the passionate arguments about what moves the team should make. So drop a comment, let me know your thoughts, and let's keep this conversation going. And hey, if you made it this far in the video, you're clearly a diehard Blue Jays fan, and I absolutely love that. Do me a huge favor and smash that like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already because we're going to be covering every single development. Every trade rumor, every signing, and every move the Blue Jays make between now and opening day. We're going to be your one-stop shop for all things Toronto baseball. And I promise you don't want to miss what's coming next. Make sure you turn on those notifications too, because when news breaks, I'm going to be here breaking it down for you as quickly as possible. Whether it's a massive trade, a surprise signing, or some juicy insider information, you'll be the first to know if you're subscribed with notifications turned on. The Blue Jays are at a crossroads right now. The decisions they make over the next few weeks will shape their entire season. Will they add that final piece that pushes them over the top? Will they stand pat and trust the roster they've built? Will Ross Atkins pull off some blockbuster move that nobody sees coming? We're about to find out, and I'm going to be right here with you every step of the way, analyzing every angle and giving you my honest thoughts on what it all means. Baseball is back, folks. Spring training is around the corner, and before we know it, we'll be watching meaningful games that actually count. The long winter is almost over, and the Blue Jays have a chance to make this season something special. Whether they capitalize on that opportunity depends on the moves they make right now. In this critical moment before pitchers and catchers report, so keep checking back on this channel. Keep engaging in the comments, and let's ride this roller coaster together. The Blue Jays offseason isn't over yet, and things are about to get very interesting very quickly. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, stay locked in, stay passionate, and most importantly, stay ready because anything can happen in the wild world of Blue Jays baseball. Let's go Blue Jays, and I'll catch you all next time. Peace.